Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
While pondering the seemingly insurmountable challenges facing our nation and the world, I remembered a guest who offered a powerful and thought-provoking perspective on how one can create positive change. I decided now was a really good time to revisit shifting realities. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. Joining us once again to contemplate our power over current events is Cynthia Sue Larson. Cynthia, the best-selling author of several books, including Quantum Jumps, Reality Shifts, and The Mandela Effect and Its Society. She has a degree in physics from UC Berkeley, an MBA degree, and a Doctor of Divinity. Cynthia is founder of RealityShifters, first president of the International Mandela Effect Conference, and managing director of Foundations of Mind. Her website, realityshifters.com. Cynthia, thanks for joining us again on Mission Evolution.
Such a treat to be here. Thank you so much, Gwilda.
We always have so much fun. I really appreciate you. So, we are living in interesting times.
Yes.
Oh yeah, may you live in interesting times. What do you see as our greatest challenge right now?
Really, it's about staying calm in the face of what looks like total chaos. And what we see with our eyes and hear with our senses and watch on the news, or maybe hear from friends, can be very deeply divisive at this time. So something that comes from the work that I do, awareness of mind-matter interaction, is that just because you see something with your senses doesn't mean that necessarily needs to be the way things continue to be, which sounds counterintuitive. You could think of it like just the science of miracles, perhaps, would be one way to put it. So people start getting a grasp of what I'm talking about.
But does seeing things with our senses, does it necessarily mean we're seeing what we think we're seeing?
Yes, exactly. So that's where things get interesting with quantum physics. As you know, I love to look at research that supports the idea that sometimes we've got a very different situation. You could have two observers that are at the same place and time and seeing different things. And now there's science to support that actually does happen in the laboratory setting, which otherwise you might think, well, that's just hearsay, or you've got witnesses at a scene of an accident and they can't agree on what happened. And you might wonder, how is that possible? Or you might have a memory with a friend or family member who was right with you, and the two of you remember things completely differently. Now, what if there's science to support why that's happening, and that objective reality isn't so objective, which I think is what you were getting at. Like, what's the most important thing? What if there is no objective reality? And I know that's heresy because our whole scientific method is built on the assumption that there is. However, quantum physics shows rather conclusively that that can't possibly be true. But we've never dealt with that. We've never properly acknowledged that little detail. You know, that emperor has no clothes moment.
As we go through this interview together, I think it'll become even clearer that I don't think at this point our minds are well designed around grokking that whole concept. I mean, it's like makes your eyes cross sometimes, doesn't it?
Yes, it can, because we tend to be taught in school that there is such a thing as objective reality, that all the colors that we see are the same and everyone's seeing the same thing. Although some people, you may know those students who are like, wait, how do we know for sure that my red and your red are the same? We've all had people like that in our class, and the teacher is usually, shush, don't talk about that.
You're being disruptive.
Right, yeah, you're being disruptive. But what if that's actually the truth? What if that is the true reality, that subjective awareness is the nature of all of reality? And we're going to start getting into that with our technology moving in that direction. We've been able to avoid the matter and sweep it under the rug, but we're not going to be able to do that when we've got quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and these kinds of technological advances.
Yeah, artificial intelligence doesn't care what our sacred cows are, does it?
Not at all.
Not at all. So how can one person be standing next to another person and be existing in two completely alternate realities.
Yeah. Okay. It sounds crazy. I'll grant you that. And it sounds like how could there possibly be any way to even test such a thing? Like, how could you devise an experiment to see what's going on there? But that's exactly what a physicist did. Eugene Wigner designed such an experiment, and it's called the Wigner's Friend experiment. And basically, the idea was that one scientist could be observing something like you remember the Schrodinger's cat experiment? It's a cat inside of a box with a vial of poison and so forth. And so the impossible experiment concept is that you've got the entanglement of a huge living being, a cat in this case, inside of a closed box, sealed, and you can't see what's happening inside. But there is a sort of a what do you call it? Random number generator, which is based on the atomic decay of a radioactive isotope, which then has a little triggering mechanism that can break open a little vial of poison. So the long story short, the cat is said to be both alive and dead in a superposition of states inside the box until observed. So that's one of these experiments. Now, if an experimenter opened the box, then you know for sure. It's like the wave function's said to be collapsed. And now there's a choice. The cat's either dead or alive based on what the first observer witnesses. Now, Eugene Wigner was saying, what if you've got someone observing the observer? And so what if it's kind of like turtles all the way down. You've got an observer of the first observer. This could continue, of course, but let's just take two observers for simplicity's sake. So now you've got the first observer who's opening the box and seeing a dead cat. Is it possible that the second observer could witness that the first observer opened the box and the cat was alive? And Eugene Wigner was just opening that up as a question, like, and could we test this? And only recently, in about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, did we actually test that. That was reported in 2019 when it wasn't a Schrodinger's cat experiment. In this case, it was the double slit experiment, another famous physics experiment from quantum physics. And two observational devices were placed at the same place, same time, observing entangled photons going through that double slit experiment. And they absolutely did, at the same place and same time, notice two different things. And so that was evidence showing, wow, we've got now a repeatable experiment that unequivocally shows you can, and they do, have two observers at the same place at the same time. One saying that those entangled photons are acting like particles, for example. The other saying, no, they're acting like waves. And that's the nature of that double slit experiment. So we've got the evidence. Yeah.
It brings up all sorts of interesting questions. You're answering questions, but it's bringing up more.
Yes.
What is speaking of uncertainty, what is quantum uncertainty?
Okay, quantum uncertainty has to do with Heisenberg uncertainty. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with that term, but that's the idea that you can know some information about an electron, for example, which is a quantum particle. You might know its mass, for example, but you don't know its momentum being affiliated and associated with its speed and so forth. So you can have some information about, for example, a given electron. You know how much it weighs, but you don't know what speed it's going at, what the momentum is. And that's baked right into quantum physics itself. So the uncertainty is kind of, this is the weird part. It's like, how can nature operate that way? But it absolutely does at a fundamental level. And so when we acknowledge that and embrace that uncertainty, then we're playing by quantum rules and recognizing that reality can and does sometimes change.
So, how is quantum uncertainty driving truth wars? First, what's a truth war?
Yeah, exactly. What is a truth war? Okay. Good question. I think some people might have wondered about that, but now it looks like some people are recognizing, I think we're in something like that. There seems to be, people talk about false information, disinformation, psyops. You might have heard fifth generation warfare, and all these terms are connected. So it goes together with the idea that my truth might not be your truth. And so then the war isn't so much about what it used to be about. It's just sort of like, which reality is right. And this may have sounded very, very airy-fairy and hard to grasp until recent times. when now we're actually seeing it happening, where people present facts which to them prove person number one is a dictator, but the other people are saying, no, person number two is the dictator. And other people say person number one is creating this whole atrocity, and people say, no, person number two is. And so it's a back and forth thing. Both of them have complete access to facts. They're both fully convinced. And rather than recognizing that this whole thing might be itself like just a limited way of perceiving the bigger picture, people can get tricked into playing a fact war. And remember, what if facts are changing? That's what I'm talking about with this quantum physics. I know that sounds a bit out there, but I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen so many times, and that's what I write about. And so if people start recognizing if that can happen, then does it even make sense to be so rigidly locked in with believing that person number one is the savior of Earth and person number two is evil, or vice versa? Maybe it's time to rise above all of the drama and recognize all these facts could and often do change. And maybe the battle that's being fought might even be amongst people that are aware of the things I'm talking about right now. That's a bigger idea. And that's with people knowing that some of these classified physics and classified mathematics must remain secret. So there are people that believe that should be remaining that way, that people aren't ready for it. And others saying, no, we're ready for it.
In fact, we need it desperately. So, why do you think that by keeping a lot of this information classified, that we are it's being manipulated? Are the masses being manipulated by not sharing this information?
Yeah, well, there's been a suppressive force in play, whatever. I'm not going to give it motive force and say, like, here are the people that are doing that, because I don't really know. I don't know who's doing that, if it is happening by individuals, but it does appear to be the case that there's been a suppression, which I've witnessed firsthand when I've done research on these mind-matter interaction scientific areas. And I've noticed that the funding has been given by DARPA, for example, and then I'd start noticing, oh, now it's being funded by IARPA, and then typically the entire thread vanishes. And that would be just something simple like thought-controlled light switches. So you can see, like, oh, that was, people are studying it, and then the funding changed slightly, and then it completely vanished. So something's definitely happening, and I can see evidence to support that. But as to, I forget your original question now. Can you repeat what you really wanted
I
to
was just wondering that, anytime you're keeping things hidden, then they can be used to manipulate the masses. And I was wondering if that's what's going on with the classified scientific stuff, you know?
Yeah. So there are many motives for, I mean, they'll say national security, of course, that's usually mentioned for explaining why did this vanish. And I think that was always the case, but that's been going on for about 80 years now. And so, and what I mean by that is going on, I mean, anything related to telepathy, so-called psychic abilities, and this mind-matter interaction. But it does tie in now with what we're seeing with things like Elon Musk's Neuralink company, and the idea that people should be able to operate their own bodies. And
Well,
what
we're going to have to pick up on this on the other side of a station break. Cynthia and I will return very shortly. Don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. We can't both be right, can we? With us this hour discussing divergent realities is best-selling author Cynthia Sue Larson. Her website, realityshifters.com. So we were talking about, before we had to go into a break, we were talking about something with Elon Musk. Would you take on from there, please?
Yes, there's a company called Neuralink that he's been heading up, as well as these other, he's got so many things going. I don't know how he does it all, but one of them is Neuralink. Another one, he was one of the originators of OpenAI back when it was truly open, and I was excited about that before it became for profit and off limits. But there's a crossover between artificial intelligence and Neuralink. which starts converging, if you will, with telepathy and psychic abilities, because a lot of these devices will be thought controlled. So Neuralink would be, for example, giving a chimpanzee the ability to play a game without using its fingers and working any kind of a mouse. But
So by thought control, do you mean not our thoughts are controlled, but our thoughts control them?
Yeah, but
Yeah. Okay.
where you're going, of course, is, well, if it's communication one way, if we can talk on the phone, can we hear too? Yes. So that's always going to be part of it. And then, what's going on with that? So I think caution is advised with artificial intelligence and with Neuralink, both of these. But getting back into Neuralink, it gives ideally the ability for people who've lost control of parts of their bodily function to hopefully regain that. That's the humanitarian positive side of the whole thing. Some people are concerned, obviously, with what we're talking about, that what if they could be controlled, like a self-driving car that can be remotely controlled and crash into a wall or something. So there can be dangers associated with any of these um, technologies.
But in all likelihood, we are being controlled already, aren't we?
Absolutely. And this happens through the media. We might not be aware of it, but I used to pay attention to, there was a magazine that talked about ad busters. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they would draw attention to the fact that advertisements were a form of thought control. Obviously, they are. They're intending to get us to purchase something or consider buying something that we might not have thought of otherwise. So ad busters was an alternative way of retraining ourselves to recognize when there's some influence factor going on. When I was raising my daughters, I would turn the sound off on the TV and ask them, watching just the visual part of an advertisement, what do you think they're trying to sell? Look, it's a happy family having a picnic. What are they selling? And it was just a game, but I wanted to encourage them to think about that question. What are they trying to sell? Because if we all think that way, then we can start recognizing manipulative forces, not just in politics, and not just advertising, but all over the place. And that would include even the mainstream trusted media. And this is what some of our politicians are now warning us about, that some of what's being reported is very fabricated, and it's not the news that we remember from watching Walter Cronkite back in the 1960s, if you
Bless his
remember.
heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need a few more of him.
Yes, and there is a Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, which is still going strong. So if people are interested in that, hopefully it does continue at least his legacy and the intentionality of true journalism to be balanced and present what they would call both sides. There might be more than two sides, but to actually show like this is what seems to be happening from what we're able to observe or what our reporter on the ground observed, and then let the viewers make their own decisions rather than fabricating a whole backstory with all kinds of motives attributed to it. And that's where the ad busting approach to life comes in. Just noticing, what are they trying to sell? What is going on here?
We're living in a time of extreme polarization. What impact is this having on individuals and on the world?
It's been very fractious and very divisive with individuals and their families, their communities. For those who choose to ask questions, that's not typically encouraged at this time, which is unfortunate because from a scientific background that I have with physics, I love asking questions. I think that seems to be and of course, with your show and everything, all the guests you have, you love asking questions. And that to me makes sense for progress and expansion and moving forward and really exploring the universe and becoming better at who we are and what we're doing. But with the world these days, and this it seems like a very regimented approach to um, creating these divisive lines and creating sort of an ideology around thought constructs that are very divisive and they tear people apart, families apart, the world apart. It seems like that can be quite dangerous, not just to our individual lives, but to our society and the fabric of it. It looks like things are getting ripped apart, basically.
As we engage in polarization, we're coming out of a state of balance. Okay.
Right.
And as we further and further and further polarize, so one side says something, the other side goes the other way, and pretty soon we're miles apart. Doesn't that have an energetic effect on us from the quantum level?
Yeah, there definitely is a feeling of, like, they would call it the Force in Star Wars. I know it sounds funny, like, that's a thing? Yeah, it is kind of a thing because we're entangled through love with one another, and, so we feel empathy for those that we identify with, and so if we hear someone saying talking smack or bad stuff about a group that we identify with, we can have a very, internal feeling, a knee-jerk reaction, if you will, to that information, to that what feels like an attack. And I would recommend, instead of going there, that we remember that, we're entangled with love with those we care about, and we can share our own experiences. But it's better to learn to rise above the whole emotional, energetic drama that's going on, because that's the pull. People are trying, the media, the stories that are being told, this whole ad busters thing of watch it and see what are they trying to sell here. And if they're selling the divisiveness, rise above it, recognize, okay, that looks like drama. I need to get pulled into that? Hopefully the answer is no. And if you don't need to get pulled into it, then don't. And recognize you don't need to carry the grief and the anxiety and the anger that's usually associated with feeling like either the victim or the rescuer or the truthful perpetrator of vigil, like we will overcome and we'll make this right. You don't want to play any of those roles. Ideally, it's much better to be an observer, and then to come from what you actually firsthand know from your own life experience.
Once we There seems to be a real campaign, if you will, to engage us in this drama, whether from one side or the other. Is there something in physics that says that where your attention goes, that's where your power goes? Can that be used?
Yes, and let's talk about that double slit experiment. I didn't go into that too much, but we did mention the cat experiment. So
Poor kitty.
I know, but if your attention goes to, for sure that's got to be a living kitty inside the box. Like that cat is alive. It has to be. That certainty, that knowing, is actually a way of selecting for that reality. It's kind of, you're cutting through all the noise, and there could be a lot of noise. You might hear all the news channels saying that cat is dead, the bad guys killed it, blah blah blah, and you can just decide, like, no, I love the cat. There's no way that cat is dead, and so when you lock on to that kind of certainty, and you can feel yourself affiliated and aligned. For me, it's the feeling within my own body. It's something I can recognize as the energy of certainty. It feels like a flow of energy. Physics does not really talk about that per se. Physics will just say that there's an experiment by Eugene Wigner, for example, that you can have the two observers, and even if the news tells you the cat is dead, Eugene Wigner, supported by this experiment by Bruckner and Prorietti from 2019 that I mentioned, collaboration between the University of Vienna, Austria, and Edinburgh, Scotland, that one that showed, like, hey, you can totally have the two observers at the same place in time, two different results. Well, guess what? That means physics is telling us you can be the observer, even watching the news, open the box and find the dead cat. You can be the observer that says, I know for sure that I can observe this the way I need it to be. That cat's alive. And so you can, now they weren't testing the cat. Again, they were looking at the double slit experiment, which is just, is it a particle? Is it a wave? That's kind of the thing they're looking at. But it's the same thing, because that's the difference between a life form being alive or someone being dead. And I know that sounds out there, but that's what the science is telling us.
So, if we have the ability to um, shift reality,
Yes.
reality shifters, by what we believe, what we allow to be our reality, if you will, can that also be being used against us by having us buy into a reality that somebody wants to create?
Well, they can try to do that, sure, but an amazing power in our individual, what you might call divinity, that direct connect to that energy I'm referring to, where when I can feel it, then I'm like, oh, we got this, we got it. It's like, even if the news is telling me the cat's dead, it's like, but I've got this energy. I know the cat's alive. So even if they're trying to do that, and they probably are, because it seems like this fifth generational truth war thing is totally going on. Some people call it psyops, that they're psychologically trying to influence us. Of course, they're trying to do that. But if you recognize they don't need to have that effect, and you can stay focused on your community everything you can directly observe, you can lock it in with love and with that feeling of certainty that you are going to choose for yourself the best possible reality that you're able to directly observe. And that you might feel like it's out of your control. And I know it looks that way, but by practicing just love and reverence and staying, lifting yourself up out of the negative kind of feelings. I love the question, how good can it get? Ask that question, even if you're feeling hopeless and discouraged. Ask it, even if it feels sarcastic. Ask it with all your heart. And even if you're feeling good, just keep asking it and then notice the difference on the days you remembered to ask it versus the days you forgot. And pay attention. Is there a difference? I would suggest that there is a difference. And you can directly observe it. So even though, yeah, they're trying to do that stuff, you can circumvent that. You can rise above it.
So the buck stops here, huh?
Yes. Great way to put
Darn, I don't have anybody I can blame but me. That's,
it.
yeah. So the choosing, I've, ever after having spoken with you before in another show, I tried what you said, the how good can it get? And I found that the same circumstances can happen, but if I'm coming at it from a how good can it get, I see the positive purpose behind whatever's going on.
Right.
Um, and otherwise I wouldn't, So it's the same thing going on, but we're framing it differently. What effect is that having? Is that changing something?
Well, for those of us who are sensitive, and by that I mean kind of like psychic, if you will, or we're sensing energies that are subtle, we're sensing like, oh, I can feel this wave of energy coming through, and I'm like, aha, I've got ignition. I'm plugged in here. So when you can feel that stuff, then you can actually go right through, the what might seem like the interference. So yeah. It's interesting because then you can see a situation. You might think it looks the same, but like you're saying, like, okay, I did say how good can it get? It looked the same, but really pay attention to the subtle energies. Notice, does it seem like people's tone of voices are different? Does it seem like they're being nicer? Like when I get on a bus, are they saying, oh, you don't have to pay for the fare this time? I'm like, why? And that actually has happened to me. I've had weird things happen that are ridiculously awesome. And it just seems like that bus driver likes me, but why? And have things just strangely go supremely well just because I'm asking how good can it get. Now the truth is I can't do a side by side comparison with every single moment of every single day, but I can do a day after day comparison on a day when I'm doing how good can it get, and just like red carpets are being rolled out everywhere, and I feel like that doesn't usually happen. So for me,
Well,
it's like, that's clearly different.
it's time for us to take a station break. Cynthia and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. That is not how I remember it. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us exploring the Mandela Effect is Cynthia Sue Larson. Her website, realityshifters.com. Cynthia, we've kind of danced around it, but not really said it. But you mentioned that two people can be standing in the same room, having the same experience, and seeing it differently, and then the memory of it is different. Can you give us some examples of that and what's really going on there?
Yeah, well, in my life, I'll sometimes remember that time, and I'll talk to my friend about something that happened, or they'll mention something, and I'll think, there's no way that could have happened. Like what they're describing, that's outrageous. And I've had people email me and say that they remember me, for example, giving a talk in my undergraduate physics days at UC Berkeley. They said, you were like giving a talk like outdoors to a group of people. I did no such thing in my memory, but I will honor that they saw that because clearly I can acknowledge there's a different reality. Another mind-blowing example is I attended a talk of the famous physicist Yasunori Nomura, who gave he was worked with Alan Guth, who was that $1 million grant winner for studying the hyperexpansion at the time of the Big Bang. But when I met Yasunori Nomura for the first time, it was at the premiere of the movie Particle Fever on the UC Berkeley campus. And I was so excited because like, oh my gosh, he's here. And at that time, I was giving talks locally in the Bay Area, mentioning Yasunori's work, showing images from his research papers. And to me, he was a local celebrity. I didn't really feel such a strong affinity for the other Particle Fever movie physicists because they're particle physicists. But then there we have one theoretical physicist, and I'm, like, wow, I'm so excited. So I talked to him after the showing of the movie. I said, let's get together for tea. And when I did get together later for tea to talk to him, I told him the truth, which is shocking to some, but not to him. I said, Yasunori, I'm sorry I didn't mention you in my book, Quantum Jumps. You did not exist in 2013 when I wrote that book. And he's like, yeah. He's like, can I have a copy of the book? In other words, no, not a problem for that theoretical physicist. I didn't even, I was prepared to explain the whole thing. Why would I think I have to? He gets it. Like he really, I said, for sure, I know I would have seen you because now I'm constantly reporting your work, like your photo, that image he's got in his paper where it shows the blurred out imaginary idea of a chair when it's behind the corner. Like if you're walking into a room and you see half the chair and the other half of the chair, you don't see it. He's got this brilliant illustration which shows, imagine that the other half of the chair is all blurred out into waves, probability waves. He says, no. He says, if you're seeing half the chair, the rest of it's there because you've collapsed that wave function for the whole thing. Like the cat is not half dead still when you open the box. It's fully alive. Anyway, because of who he is, he got it. So that's an example. Me, one physicist talking to world famous physicist Yasunori Nomura, was like, yeah, these things happen. And boy, I was prepared to go into all the detail because I was prepared for handling the little shock wave that goes through you. Like, what do you mean I didn't exist? No, he was already there. Like, yeah.
Our physicists might be the ones that save us, I tell you. So you spoke of wave function, and you've mentioned it several times. Would you
Right.
kind of break that down for us lay people?
All right. So the chair example I just mentioned, that's a brilliant picture. So imagine, if you will, that you're walking into a room and it's a friend's house and you can see half of a chair. Your friend stops you and they're saying, how are you doing? How are you? And you want to see the rest of the chair because it's got an interesting design to it. And, sometimes you just, something catches your eye, like that is fascinating. I didn't know they had whatever, that fancy chair here in this house. I got to see the rest of it. But you need to be polite. So you're just standing there. Now, in physics, there's an idea that a wave function, such as in the that double slit experiment I keep referring to, a particle such as a photon might either be a particle, which is like a little paintball that goes splat and it leaves a paintball mess when it hits the wall, versus a wave that just kind of goes like this, and it's creates diffraction patterns of like ripples in a pond. When you throw two pebbles in a pond, you'll get ripples that interfere constructively and destructively. So those are the two ways that you can kind of picture. And if you're thinking of just this wave function, then what does that look like? It doesn't look like what you think. Like it looks like that, like if you could see the other half of the chair and it was uncollapsed, it was, in that superposition of states kind of blurred out wave function, it would look blurry. It would look like you're looking at something underwater. We don't see things like that unless you're a psychic and then you say like, oh yeah, I do. Sometimes I'll see something coming into this reality and I'll know it's not really here because I'm seeing it like a wave function. It's an interdimensional kind of viewing that's not typical. People don't usually talk about that.
So is that is the wave function or the ability to view it? Does that play into being precognizant? Are you actually seeing what's possibly taking form at the quantum level?
I feel, as an experiencer of reality shifts and quantum jumps, I'd say yes, because I can actually feel when there's an adjacent reality. I had been wishing for another physicist besides the one I'd mentioned in quantum jumps. And so if Yasunori never asked me about the whole thing, he's like, yeah. But to me, it makes sense why he came into being, because I wanted a relatable physicist that was someone that I could actually talk to and meet, who was friendly and outgoing and like, yeah. versus, I'm not going to name names, but versus others. So yay. So it's like, yes, I manifested a great physicist, and I'm very happy for it. So you could actually feel, but I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that when I went to go see that movie premiere that he would be there. In fact, I didn't know why my intuition was so strongly insisting I must go to this thing. I didn't want to go to the movie premiere. My guides were pushing, is the strong word for it. It was like, yes, go. And I didn't dress up for it or anything. I should have, but I just dragged myself the way I was, like, oh, I'll go see a particle physics movie. I don't know why. And then Yasunori's there, like, aha. I had
So
no idea.
if we does our intention play into this? So
Yes,
whichever reality we kind of end up in has to do with what we're intending, and we but do you have to then pay attention like you did to, okay, so you intended you want another physicist and you're being pushed to go to this movie. You had to pay attention to that prompting to manifest what you had intended, didn't you?
exactly. So we can call an adjacent reality into our periphery. We can bring something close. And a lot of people feel like they're so close to winning the lottery or getting the love of their life or the job they desire, whatever. They feel like it's right there. But you're right. You're exactly right. They need to, then the next step is listen. When you get nudged to do something you really don't want to do, like I dragged myself to that part of this particle physics movie. Like, why? I don't like that. I like theoretical physics. Like, what
Well,
the heck?
how about our personal damage and lockdowns? We had a bad
Right.
experience. I'm not going to do that again. Does that interfere the degree that we are damaged and not flowing within ourselves? Does that interfere with our ability to manifest?
Only if we let it. So it can, but we can be the ones that choose not to let that happen. And I went through some of the damage with long COVID. I did suffer for 18 months with
Oh,
hundreds of
Cynthia.
symptoms. Yeah. But I know, and even in the darkest pits of despair of that whole thing with 2 or 300 symptoms, and what did it feel like? Just what it felt like was I aged 30 years overnight, and
Mm,
all my physical systems were falling apart simultaneously. Not fun. Not
mm.
in any way, shape, or form is that fun. And I could barely think, brain fog, everything. So, but I didn't lose my ability to keep asking, how good can it get? And I didn't lose my faith, knowing that no matter how, I even accepted this could be the rest of my life. It's like this. Okay. So, but there's a beauty in accepting that and keeping the faith and just keep asking, how good can it get? Because what happened next is I know miracles can happen, and that's what I'm saying. This is the science of miracles, and so I'm just acknowledging, like, okay, if and when it's time, maybe there's some blessing in this experience for me to go through it. I think there is, and there was. It's like when you ask that question, how good can it get? I'm going through the same thing, but I'm seeing the advantage. Now I'll be able to help other people when at some miraculous point I pull out of this. Yes, with natural means of healing. Yes, it is possible. So that's kind of cool. And that's something we can do. So even if you're feeling like you're painted in a corner and everything's falling apart, just if you have any faith, hang on to it. If you're able to ask, how good can it get? Keep asking. And if you're able to just accept things, there's a beauty in that because it relaxes you. And when you're relaxed, you're responsive and you can start noticing when that adjacent reality is right there. Like, oh, I think I'm healthy again. Okay, I am healthy again. And you can bring yourself into it like, I am here. And you can believe it when there's no reason to believe it. And everyone's telling you nobody recovers from long haul COVID or whatever. They were saying stuff like that. And I just like, yeah, they would say that. So they're
Watch
going
me,
to
just watch me.
say, right.
So, how does fear play in here? When we fear something, we tend to hyper
Yes.
focus on it and lock it in. Are we creating, manifesting our fears for that reason?
Yes, but to be masterful enough to rise above all fears is obviously a very high level of human evolution. Most of us haven't reached a point where there's no fear whatsoever. If you're in a body, you'll have physical fears. That's healthy, that's normal. So what you can get through meditation is just the gradual but very incremental and very eventually quite powerful ability to rise above those fears, to recognize, okay, I'm feeling afraid. Like when I was recovered and I did move into that reality, I'd broken through and I thought I was healed, but I wasn't sure. I was in that uncertainty. So then I want to go for a walk, but will I collapse? Will all of those symptoms recur? I actually went through a panic attack and my breathing changed and I was on a walk far from home, well, far from me to go from home if there was going to be an episode. And I convinced myself, and so I was able to recognize, okay, I recognize this is a fear reaction. I'm not able to breathe because my entire autonomic nervous system is panicking. I'm going to reset it right now through meditation. Now, if I didn't meditate, would I be able to do that? Probably not. And then I probably would have collapsed and I'd say to a neighbor, could you call for help? I need to get a ride home. I can't walk home, because that's the kind of thing that was happening with long haul COVID. You go on a walk and you can't come home. I'm laughing, but it wasn't funny. It was, terrifying. So that kind of fear, I know firsthand. Can you overcome it? Yes. I just kept telling myself, this is a fear reaction. Your nervous system is shutting down based on memories from the last year and a half that you can't go on a walk like this without collapsing. But you can. So just breathe slowly, calm down. You don't have to go further. You can turn around and go back. You'll make it.
So having had bad experiences like you're just describing, um, do we literally step into a different timeline when we are triggered into believing the outcome will be the same?
Yeah, you can go back and forth. And it's something I mentioned in my new book, The Mandela Effect in Its Society, Awakening from Me to We. Yeah, we can flip flop and you can actually feel yourself kind of going into that reality. Then you can pull yourself back and then fall back into it. It can go back and forth for a while. And they're both perfectly valid realities. So it's good to know it's happening. That's the power. Everything we're talking about today is the idea. Just even if people are listening and they're just barely able to believe it, but if you're open to it, this is power right here. Because then like, okay, if something like this does happen, and I recognize maybe I am going back and forth between two realities, you can ask how good can it get, and preferably go into the positive reality, the one that has less of the problems that you're afraid of or concerned about.
Well, it seems like it's happening anyway. The key is us making the choice versus having it made for us, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's time for us to take another station break. Please stay with us as Cynthia and I explore overcoming hype, hysteria, and polarization. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org, and we're coming to you on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. Do I get to choose which reality I live in? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Cynthia Sue Larson. Cynthia, again, we started out, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
Yes.
Um, and it would appear right now how we're living that we need a certain amount of detachment to maintain balance. But do we want to become detached from everything?
That's a great question. I would recommend stay attached to the ephemeral, eternal truths. The things that are always true no matter what are things like love, the intangibles, the unmeasurables, ironically. So the things that we would wish to be always true, when you ask yourself, like, what's the true nature of reality? Hopefully it's not something silly like whoever has the most toys wins. That's a pretty shallow.
That's the
That's a
reality we're living in right now. I want something different.
Yeah, we can get fixated on the material, but the eternal, the absolute qualities, the things that are everlasting would be of the unmeasurable quality, like love and so forth. So if you latch onto that and recognize, what if that is the true nature of all that is, that it is consciousness, that it is love, that it's this kindness, this connectedness that we do actually feel when we're watching a sunset, when we're enjoying nature, when we're feeling the warmth of a smile of a baby or the joy of seeing a kitten or a puppy, that kind of thing. When you're feeling the true heights of living, it's not going to be anchored in the material so much. It's going to be this feeling that comes through. And when you recognize, okay, that I can stay attached to, that I can keep faith in, that love, that absolute, infinite, eternal love and joy and reverence. And it's a feeling that's unmistakable. And if once you start noticing like this is real, and it's not something you're imagining, and you don't get it because you paid money for it. You don't need to pay money for a sunset or to feel the joy of nature. These are the absolute eternal truths. And I'm not just being kind of woo-woo here. I'm actually saying this is what I would recommend to stay attached to. Even the word attachment is a funny word because we tend to think of attaching to something physical. How do you attach to something so ephemeral as the absolute? And this is the spiritual question, of course, that I can't answer that for you, but each of us can individually have our own unique, personal, firsthand experience with that kind of feeling of absolute love. And it's so much greater than the love you might feel for a child or for a lover. It's something that is it's like behind all of that. And then you start noticing like, this is the real love. Being in love with everyone and everything is possible. And as we do that, we start to see what the great teachers of the perennial traditions like Buddha and Jesus Christ and all the others are talking about. They're actually sharing this is the way the reality really can be. And I think that's why these teachers were given to us to help us pay attention and put intention into that direction, because that's a good direction.
And they all have that in common, don't they?
They do.
The great teachers. So let's talk a little bit about detachment that we might need right now, because we started this whole thing out by saying we got the Republicans, we've got the Democrats, we got the Christians, we got the Muslims. I mean, there's every place we look, people are
Yeah.
polarized against each other right now. And as we said,
Yeah.
if we buy into that, then they've got us. They've got our energy moving towards whatever the agenda is, and it might not be something that we like. So, how do we rise above that? We've been talking about that. How do we rise above that, above the manufactured hysteria?
Yeah, well, I would recommend asking yourself questions. Ask what you're really living for, and hopefully it's not to exact vengeance upon the bad guys. If that's where you're at, then okay, that's where you're at.
That's a miserable place, but yeah, I hear you.
I know. And some people, it's like, but I got to because these bad guys are so bad. But remember, what if it's a trap? What if that's just a way to just suck the life force out of you? Because that's eventually what starts happening, and you'll feel exhausted and you'll feel depleted generally, and it's hard to even remember what the joys of life are. So it's important to regain and retrain yourself that way. And so for those, I think people watching the show are open to meditation. They're open to self-expansion and growth. And that's fabulous, because then you can ask, what am I living for? And when you start noticing, okay, what if it is something like, when I ask that question, I get love as the answer. I'm getting these, love and kindness and compassion and reverence and just the true exaltation of that feeling of connection with nature. When that's coming through and I can feel it so clearly, then it's like, yeah, that's what I'm living for. And if I can stay focused on that, there's the challenge. Even though I'm seeing constant reminders of this bad guy or that bad guy, or look what they're doing now, and haha, we're going to get them this time, and realizing, wait a minute, where is that really going? I know it can be quite convincing, and I know we can get swept up in the whole thing. But what's really happening right now is an opportunity for humanity to finally drop the shackles and chains of this whole drama triangle, which is the victims triangle. Basically, there's a name for it, the Karpman drama triangle. You can look it up and see that. Authors like Lynn Forrest write about it, Beyond Victim Consciousness, in books I recommend. That's a great book. So basically saying there's a way to drop that really strong temptation to get into that victim consciousness, like they did something bad and they must pay, or be the rescuer. I must save these people who something bad has happened to them. And then the next step on the unhappy merry-go-round is to be the perpetrator itself. I'm now exacting revenge. I am the one who's fixing everything. these are all mistakes. And so if we can recognize, like, okay, mistake, 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 none of that's working, what does work? This is where you come back to those perennial truths of kindness, compassion. And you might say, but how is that going to be strong in the face of all this wrongdoing? It is the ultimate strength. This is the only way to pull together. And
It's
it's,
it sounds like you're not talking about detaching so much as remaining attached to the universal love that's represented in nature to pull you out of the polarization or the drama triangle of villain, victim, hero.
yeah, it is a little of the detaching too. And that's just mindfulness. Some people go to distraction, watch a funny program, do something you enjoy, get out in nature, pull yourself away from your device. So that would be the detaching. And that is actually helpful because a lot of people, they don't just instantly do what I'm doing and connect straight to the absolute wherever you are. I need that in order to be on Earth. I can't even stand it here otherwise. No offense. No offense to anybody. To me, it looks like, oh, this is an infested planet. But for people who actually thought this was a good place, and they're not always. I've got one foot. I'm always half detached. So, for me, the detachment already there. But for other people, you definitely need to give yourself away time from the devices. Don't get sucked into people who are just complaining. You might think it has no effect on you, but it will eventually sort of take root, and you don't want that taking root. So
Well, isn't it about
careful.
frequency and resonance? I mean, everything is, expresses according to frequency. So
Yeah.
if we're aligning with a lower or more distorted or more narrow frequency, like in polarization, we're resonating with it, and then that doesn't that just pull us away from a lot of our potential?
It does. Yeah. And so it's those destructive tendencies, they're only as strong if we give in to them. And that's, of course, the whole challenge. That's the human condition. Like, why is there evil in the world? That's why, because people keep giving into getting sucked into that drama on some level. And so that's why it persists. But we're at each evolutionary juncture, which I believe we're in one right now. This year, 2025, will be epic, unforgettable, pivotal, huge. And so we're getting this amazing invitation for humanity to rise above all that drama, to totally detach it at a level we've never managed before, to do it individually and collectively. And I believe we'll be getting opportunities for that this year and next year, 2025, 2026.
I've heard a lot of different modalities that people are saying that. So, and isn't it typical that when you're moving into a time of great change, it's chaotic. It's a lot of destruction going on to free up the constituent.
Yeah. Looks like I don't know if I'm frozen or you're frozen. I'll keep talking.
Parts hit by the flotsam. Yeah.
Okay.
Can we miss being hit by the flotsam? Like all these constituent parts are being thrown up in the air. And, not only miss being hit by it, but can we utilize this alchemical time to create something more to our liking?
Yes, it's you might feel like you're playing musical chairs and the music's getting faster and there are fewer chairs to sit in if you've ever played that child's game. But you can recognize that it's really a win-win thing. It's not the competition it looks like. And time does something different when you go into this detachment and the love and the kindness, you're in a different time. It's like you're in the Matrix with the bullets going so slowly that you can just sort of move and they
You
don't
gotta
hit you.
move and they don't get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been experiencing a lot of that lately. Have you? I mean, sometimes it seems like the time just drags on, and the next time it's just gone without, it doesn't seem consistent anymore. What's
Yes.
causing that? What's causing that experience?
Well, that's that linear time experience that we tend to take for granted. For those of us who are the front runners in this whole human evolutionary step, we've been feeling that we're outside of linear time quite a lot. So we're noticing abnormal, I don't know what you want to call it, all kinds of strange things happening with time where it slows down, speeds up, sometimes repeats, like you'll get that repeating cycle of events. I write about this in my books. And even before the Matrix came out, I was talking about this because it just seems like there's some weird stuff going on with reality. So when you notice that, that's actually a good thing because it means that your consciousness is operating outside of linear time, which in physics you would expect to be true. Actually, time is a dimension that we don't really we take it for granted. We don't explore it much, so we don't know how is it possible. Like, what is time like in outer space versus Earth? Physicists will think about that kind of thing. You'll see it in a movie sometimes, but we don't otherwise give it much thought. Now we're getting the opportunity to experience it, and that infinite, eternal existence of self that is, like I said, unmeasurable. That's, you exist there, I exist there. That's the true reality.
It's the
The
true
linear
reality.
time, yeah, that's just a
Well, we're
construct.
just about out of time, and so I have to ask you, Cynthia, what is your mission?
Oh gosh, just for to help everyone and everything be the best we can be. So to really wish the best for all concerned and to bring this awareness into all of our collective understanding at this time.
And quickly in closing, what advice do you have for our people?
Keep asking my favorite question. How good can it get? Put it on a piece of paper, write it, put it in your wallet, put it on the refrigerator, stick it on sticky notes everywhere. And so if you forget to ask it, there it is.
Well, Cynthia, how good can it get?
Thank you. Let's
Thanks for
find
coming
out.
on. Thanks for coming. Yes, find out. Thanks for coming on the show, sweetie. Really love working with you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Our guest this hour has been Cynthia Sue Larson. Cynthia is founder of Reality Shifters and the author of several books, including Quantum Jumps, Reality Shifts, and the Mandela Effect and its Society. To find out more about Cynthia and all she has to offer, visit her website, realityshifters.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us right here next time, as this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support during these challenging times.